Hello, and welcome to our Robert's Rules of Order training video.
There are a few basic items you need to know before we move into a mock meeting. Let's start with some basic vocabulary. General vocabulary. The first vocabulary word you will need to know is the chair or presiding officer. The presiding officer is the person presiding over the meeting, usually the president. The second vocabulary word is representative. A representative is a member with voting rights, aka you. The next word is quorum. A quorum is the minimum number of people needed to conduct business, 50% plus one. Next is the floor. The floor is the person who has been recognized by the chair and may speak. Next and final is the question. The question is the current proposal or topic that is held before the assembly.
Next, in order to run your meeting with Robert's Rules of Order, you need an agenda that follows a basic format. It should contain the following orders of business. Call to order. Roll call to determine a quorum. Approval of minutes. Reports of officers and/or special committees. Old/unfinished business. New business. And adjournment. Possible additions include the following: announcements, open comments, approval of agenda, speakers, and etc.
For a meeting to run smoothly, there needs to be an interaction between the chair and the assembly. This is mainly accomplished through the use of motions. Motions are any formal proposal of action by the assembly. There are 4 types of motions. The first is a main motion. These motions bring a new topic before the assembly, and they require a second and majority vote. An example of a main motion would be a piece of legislation being brought to the table. The next type of motion is a subsidiary motion. These are motions that propose action on the main motion. Most require a second and a majority vote, but some require a 2/3 vote instead. An example of this would be a motion to waive the reading of a piece of legislation. The third type of motion is an incidental motion. These are points of order, information, clarification, privilege, and parliamentary inquiry. We will give more examples of these in a few minutes. And finally, the last type of motion is a privilege motion. These are used when something needs to be taken care of now. Most require a second and a majority vote. An example of this type of motion would be a motion for recess.
Let me clarify the incidental motions a little further. First is point of order. Point of order is used when the rules have been breached. For example, if while discussing a motion, a speaker gets off topic, a representative could say, "Point of order, please keep discussion germane or relevant to the motion." Next is point of information. Point of information is used when offering a pertinent and relevant fact to the discussion. Next is point of clarification, which is used to clarify something that may sound confusing. Next is point of privilege. Point of privilege is used when something relating to the privileges of members, such as room conditions. For example, if the speaker is talking too quietly or the room is too loud for you to hear, you can say, "Point of privilege, can you please speak up?" Last, point of parliamentary inquiry, which is used to obtain information on a matter of parliamentary law or the rules of the organization bearing on the business at hand. Incidental motions are unique in that you can usually interrupt in order to bring about the change, whereas most other motions, you must wait until you have the floor in order to speak.
Now it's time to look at the action behind making a motion. There are 6 main steps. Number 1, bring motion to the floor. Number 2, seconding and consent. Number 3, motion/information is presented. 4th, questions on the motion if there are any. 5, debate/discussion. 6, voting, call the question.
Let's take a closer look at the action behind a motion. Step 1, bringing a motion to the floor. A representative will say, "I move to bring main motion A to the floor." Notice the representative does not say, "I motion." Step 2. Seconding and consenting. Once a representative has moved to bring a motion to the floor, it must receive a second. Once the second is received, the chair will ask for the consent of the assembly. The assembly will then give consent. The chair will then ask for any objections. If there are no objections, the motion is brought to the table and presented. If there is an objection, the objector will state why they object. The chair will then ask the member who made the original motion if they'd like to retract their motion. If not, the assembly moves into a vote. Step 3. The motion and information are presented. The author of the item being presented through the main motion gets an opportunity to explain the motion, which is usually a bill or resolution. Step 4. Questions on the motion, if any exist. This is not a time to give your opinion. It is to obtain more information about the motion. Step 5. Debate and discussion. Not all motions are debatable. If the motion is debatable, the chair will state, "We will now move into a discussion of main motion A." The person who proposed the motion in the first place has the privilege of obtaining the floor first during discussion. After this person, the chair will acknowledge each person before they may speak. Step 6. Voting. Call the question. After discussion has been exhausted, a representative can say, "I call the question," to bring the debate to an end. The chair will then ask for objections. If there are no objections, the assembly will move into a vote. If there is an objection, the discussion will continue.
Here are more examples of main motions that can be made. Examples of main motions. These motions are listed in order of precedence. A motion can be introduced if it is higher on the chart than the pending motion. Note that this chart includes the purpose and how you state it in the meeting. It might not be a bad idea to bring this as a cheat sheet to the first few meetings you attend. Also, this chart states whether you can interrupt the speaker to make the motion, if the motion needs a second, whether it is debatable, and how many members of the body are needed in order to pass the motion. Further, here are a few examples of incidental motions. Notice that the purpose of these motions are in no order of precedence. These motions arise incidentally and are decided immediately. And with most of them, you are allowed to interrupt the speaker and a second isn't needed.
After going through the motions, they usually end up in a vote. So let's take a look at how to handle voting. One way is by voice. Voting members announce their votes out loud. Next is by division, which is a show of hands or standing. For roll call, each voting member is called upon and then asked to state their vote. For ballot, the members vote by secret ballot. Finally, another way to handle voting is by consent. Members vote by verbally stating consent and remaining silent when asked for objections. Consent can be used as a way to bypass discussion and division voting. To vote in favor of a proposal, you say yay or raise hand after chair states all in favor. To vote against a proposal, you say nay or raise hand after chair states all opposed. To abstain from voting, you say abstain or raise hand after chair asks, are there any that abstain?
We're almost ready to put all these items together, but first we must discuss one of the most, if not the most important aspect of Robert's Rules of Order: general rules and etiquette. General rules and etiquette for regular meetings. First, always be respectful of others. Next, personal attacks and cross-debate will be gavelled by the chair. Keep your comments relevant to the discussion and don't make them into a speech. Avoid using names in a debate. You may only yield the floor to another representative for a question. You may not give them the floor for debate purposes. In order to obtain the floor, you must first raise your hand and wait until you have been recognized by the chair before you may speak.
Now let's try to walk through this slowly together. The first agenda item is calling the meeting to order. This is accomplished by the chair banging his or her gavel and stating, "I call this meeting to order." Next, without pause, the chair will say, "Will the secretary please call roll?" If your organization does not have a secretary, whomever holds responsibilities close to that of a secretary can accomplish this task. At this time, the secretary will call out the names of all the members from a roster to determine attendance in order to discover if there is a quorum. If there are enough members present to meet the quorum, the chair will announce, "We have a quorum." If there are not enough members to meet the quorum, the chair will state, "There is no quorum." The meeting can continue without a quorum. However, the assembly will be unable to vote on any items in the business categories of the agenda. The following item on the agenda is guest speakers. If there is a guest speaker, the chair will yield the floor to them. If there is not a guest speaker, the chair will announce this fact and then move on to the next agenda item. Upon moving into the approval of the minutes, the chair will say, "Will the secretary please read the minutes from the last meeting?" At this point, the secretary can start to read the minutes, or a representative can obtain the floor and make a motion to waive the reading of last meeting's minutes. They will have to do this by stating, "I move to waive the reading of last meeting's minutes." Another member will then need to second this proposal. After there has been a second, the chair will announce, "Second has been called. Is there a consent?" The assembly will then verbally state consent if they agree. Next, the chair will ask, "Are there any opposed to the consent?" If there are none opposed, the chair states, "The reading of the meeting minutes is waived." Now let us move into a discussion. Discussion will then begin. During this time, members can state any corrections that they have noticed need to be made to the minutes. For example, these could be typos, grammatical errors, or misinformation. Once all discussion has ceased, the chair will announce, "If there is no further discussion, the minutes stand approved as corrected." You may be wondering, what happens if someone opposes waiving the reading of the meeting minutes? If someone opposes, the chair will yield the floor to them so that they can state their reason of opposition. The chair will then ask if the person who made the motion would like to retract their motion. If they say yes, they will have to do this by stating, "I move to rescind the waiving of reading the last meeting's minutes." The general process of seconding, consenting, and etc. will need to be followed. If the motion is granted through a vote, the chair will state, "The motion to rescind the waiving of the reading of last meeting's minutes is carried. Will the secretary please begin to read last meeting's minutes?" After the minutes are read, the chair will announce, "We will now move into a discussion." After the discussion has ceased, the chair may state, "If there is no further discussion, the minutes stand approved as corrected." After the approval of the minutes, the chair says, "We will now move into officer reports." The officer may have the floor. At this time, each officer gets a chance to take the floor and give their reports. Once all reports have been given, the chair will state, "We will now move into committee reports." A representative from the committee may have the floor. After all of the reports are given, the chair will move on to the next agenda item. At the conclusion of the committee reports, the chair will announce, "We will now move into old business." Does anyone wish to bring the motion to the floor? A representative must then move to bring the item to the table. The process of seconding, consenting, discussing, and voting will have to take place. If there is no old business, the chair will move on to new business by stating, "We will now move into new business." Does anyone wish to bring the motion to the floor? Once again, a motion will need to be made, followed by the same processes as previously described. Once all business has been handled, the chair may say, I entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting. A representative will then have to move to adjourn the meeting. This motion must be seconded, but there is no discussion portion. It moves straight into a vote. If the majority of members vote in favor of adjourning, your meeting is over.